Mr. Garzone, we love your concert. Will you come to our college and cut out the tongues of us? So that's why I say always be careful when you open your mouth.
Hey there, Jay Metcalf here from BetterSax.com. Today's very special guest is the saxophone pioneer George Garzone. He currently teaches at the Berklee College of Music. He's also taught at Manhattan School of Music, the New England Conservatory, the New School, and others. In today's video, George is going to share with us some absolute saxophone gems that you're not going to want to miss on sound, embouchure, articulation. And we're also going to talk about his latest book, The Chromatic Triadic Approach. I've put a link in the description below if you'd like to pick up a copy for yourself in the Apple bookstore. Now, if you like videos like these and would like to see more, you know what you got to do. One thing I want to ask you about, just because it's really interesting, like you have this video about articulation that everybody's seen, right? You know that one.
Because it was like, all right, let's do a little sample, see how it looks and sounds. So jokingly, I go, if I had my way when you come in for your first lesson, I would cut out your tongue. And they used it in the Dario. And I was like, Krista, what are you, nuts? Why did you put that in there? No, we love it. It's great. That's how we feel, right? I start getting these emails from the Eastern Bloc countries, the conservatory. Mr. Garzone, we love your concert. Will you come to our college and cut out the tongues of us? So, I mean, the two things I'm really into, you know, when you first come for a lesson is sound and time, you know. So they're both related. For me, when I started teaching at Berklee in 75, you know, I just got married and I got the gig and I was really happy. But these kids were coming in, you know, from all over the country, and the sound was, I wasn't used to hearing that because I grew up in a saxophone family like Lovano. So, you know, from birth, we knew what sound was, and these kids were coming in. So every week it was like so bad. Like I said to myself, man, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this. I mean, that's how tough it was, you know. So I had to figure out what can I do to make these kids sound better. So I looked at them, and a lot of them were coming in with a classical embouchure trying to play jazz, and even their classical embouchure was more of a stuffed situation, you know what I mean? So I worked on a concept where I call it the Garzone embouchure, where all I did was have them support the mouthpiece from the top teeth, which makes your bottom lip be open, you know, because you're not putting any pressure yet. Then just bring your lip up and blow. Well, that that was the beginning of me being able to deal with teaching. So that was cool. And then a lot of these kids had no time, you know. So I taught them how to practice with the metronome, believe it or not. No one used the metronome. One day I brought the metronome into my class, my ear train class, and I said, does anyone know what this is? And it was like showing the sign of the cross to the vampire. You know, it was like stunned to see how many people do not, you know, use the metronome. So, I mean, I worked with it when I was at school all my life, and I still do, and it's the premise of what we're about. To me, harmony is more time-orientated than it is harmonic. If you have a G7, the likelihood of you getting through that rhythmically is much greater than harmonically. You know, and then, you know, when the chromo and the triadic came into place, that because of my stability of my time, I was able to roam. You know, you can't roam in Rome if you're really roaming. You dig? You got to be able to roam with the chariot and the horses, you know. No, you know what I'm saying? It's like, so, you know, you teach people how to be flexible harmonically through the time. people think I don't want them to tongue, and then they're like, oh, Mr. Garzone, I came to your gig the other night and you were tonguing like crazy. Yeah. But I'm telling you not to tongue right now, so that when you finally get this together, you come in with the lightest tongue known to man. I mean, all the stuff that Train played, he wasn't articulating that. It's impossible. So, you help them to understand that the tongue is a crutch if you're trying to play intervallic things or things that are after the scale,
Yeah, and the tongue, I mean, what I think, the tongue, when you're using it too much, that gets in the way of your rhythm as well. That kind of stumbles you. So if you drop that out, you could focus on sound and rhythm, get that together, and then you add the tongue in later once you have those things solid.
Exactly. And it's, I'm telling you, but, it's not ta, T-A-A, it's da now, So I broke it down like microcosmos, the difference between no tongue and the lightest tongue known to man. Yeah, it's something the individual's got to work on. It's pertinent to how you play, what you're playing. I mean, you listen to Dexter. Yeah, he tongues, but he does it in his way. You know what I mean? I'm not saying don't ever tongue again. The only reason I climb on people is when it's too much. And like you hear them play and they're slowing down because, you know what I mean? They're slowing down because the tongue is slowing them down. I really think that this thing that I'm teaching everyone is a current sound that you give it to them now, and hopefully in 10 or 15 years they'll get it together. Because, Jay, it took me, like I started teaching in New York in 94, 95, and I literally took me about 15 or 20 years to not only put it together, but to understand what it was, how it goes, and to be able to play it myself. I mean, a lot of it was hit and miss, and I remember some of the cats in New York were like, man, what's that shit you're playing? And they were literally talking about that word,
Just hearing you say that it took you this length of time, this, 10, 15 years to get one particular concept, under your, in the bag or whatever, that I think is an important message, because a lot of people are like, I'm practicing every day. How come I still can't do this? Or that, they don't understand that for everybody, there's a lot of time that goes into getting somewhere.
Well, I mean, like, the kids, I call them kids, but the students are into quick fixes, like, I want to learn some 2/5 licks and so I can go out, but if within 2 weeks and play that. But if you do that, that's what you're going to play, which is fine. That's great. But if you're going to deal with something that's going to take time, it's going to take time. But in the end, you've arrived at something. Like this whole triadic concept, if you study with me, it's not about sounding like me. It's like sounding like you. Because if you think in a row, I had Donnie McCaslin, Seamus Blake, Chris Cheek, Mark Turner, all the cats coming per half hour. And they forced me to think of something that was like a little bit over their head, because these kids were so killing when they were 19, Josh Redman. So I had to like go into my brain and figure out something that would challenge them. And I literally pulled this from the air, It's really very simple. I mean, when I teach the students, as long as, and, by the time you get to college or even, people in high school, if you know how to formulate triads, you're just toppling random triads, in varied inversions with half step in between. So that when you hear it, it says, oh, it doesn't sound that bad until you try to do it. If you decide you're going to get into this, you need to practice it slow. Because if you don't, you're going to learn it wrong, and then you'll have to go back and do it over again, which is wasting time, So everything needs to be done at a snail's pace. listening to records and just kind of playing by ear. That's the whole premise for me, is to teach people how to play by ear versus paper. I don't know how you feel about that.
I strongly agree with that.
It's less theoretical. It's more harmonic. You know what I'm saying? So you've got to really have an ear to be able to do this. The thing I deal with is with high-level players like I'm doing right now. I teach the Triadic and the Global Masters program to break them down and to have them play random major triads with half-step in between and not repeat yourself. It goes against everything they were taught, And that's just a formulation of it. Then when you get into the sound against whatever the harmonic continuity is, they've got to deal with that. A lot of it is, it's negative sound that they're not used to hearing. People are taught, like, do this, do that, especially at school. They teach you the nuts and bolts at Berkeley. That's what I loved about it, because when I went there, I knew zero, Jay, and I walked in and I was like, wow. So, taking that and then expanding it is, what this thing is all about. I'm trying to help these students understand that, if you want something that's solid, it's going to take a minute, and people aren't impressed. I mean, me, Jay, 2/5s are great, and people get mad at me if I play a 2/5 now. The kids will come up and say, man, you played a 2/5. What's the problem? It's the balance of the other thing. But, you need to know that to enhance what I'm doing, I mean, you talk to anyone, and they'll back you on that. And before you can move into anything stratospheric, you've got to know the history. When I first came to New York, I was doing, I wasn't working the big clubs, Lavano with the Vanguard once in a while with the Nonet, but I was playing every Saturday night at Cornelia, because, the guys that were the managers were my students. They were like, man, play next Saturday night. And I remember the musicians got mad at me because then they put up a stink because I was pulling in people, and that's what the club was interested in. I mean, the place was packed every Saturday night, which amazed me too. But what I'm getting at is, and I tell the students, if you play traditional and you play something a little more exploratory, you're going to get twice the crowd, And my wife, who I actually met at Cornelia Street when she came to New York from Argentina, it's a sacred place for us, So I wowed her with the traumatic approach, and the rest is history. Now let's go to the complete opposite and talk about people that are perfection. They just want to do one thing. Like, I have a friend, Dave Bryant. He played free all his life, from Boston, was in my ensemble in the 70s. His goal was to play with Ornette Coleman. Okay, and this kid, I mean, I didn't realize till later he could play tunes, but he never played tunes. Every time we played, it was free. We had a group called Shock Exchange, and he's like, I just want to play free because I want that gig with Ornette. And you know what? He got it. He played with Ornette. So there's people that have that vision about doing one thing. But for me, I don't know, I dig playing straight ahead. It's challenging, Plus, if you're in the teaching thing and, you get these kids that can't play that, you've got to be able to hip them to that. And, it's just me. I want to cover both sides, I think in the end, I wanted to have a complete version of something that, if you came into the club, you knew nothing about jazz, there would be a relatory that you could grab onto. I mean, we used to have, think about my band, The Fringe. You know, The Fringe is an avant-garde trio. People used to come in that knew nothing about jazz, and they were like, man, we don't know what the hell you're playing, but something is telling us to come. And some of these guys came every week for 17, 18 years, you know. You can lead people, like, harmonically, even if whether they know nothing or are completely schooled. You know, you can lead them in such a way by giving them, you know, it's like, you know, something they can latch onto.
And you know, that's really interesting too. I just want to comment on that because everything you're talking about, you're always kind of connecting it to the listener. We don't always talk about music, you know, jazz music in terms of, you know, how it's affecting the listener. So I just thought that was interesting.
You know, when you play, sometimes people play for themselves and, you know, they're not concerned about the listener, which I'm not saying you should be, but that's what, you know, like I'm doing is I want to make sure that the people can not only hear what I'm playing, but feel the vibe and the intensity of what we're doing. It's like when you listen to Lovano, it's like, man, he captures you on every single note. There's not one note that goes down that slipped away, you know. So I think I really grew up understanding what that was about. You know, people that like captivate when they play because they're connecting to the audience. But the one thing I do not do is I never look out into the audience. I do not play with my eyes open. I don't understand that, you know. You know, it's just a thing. Like sometimes I see people, I don't know if they're transcending the other side of the wall. It's like you look at Train, man. When I watch Train play, I understand why he sounds the way he does on the record, because he's just gone, you know. And I think the more time goes on with music and what we do, the more I'm understanding what he was about, you know, in Miles. I mean, a lot of this, you know, if you want some content about the Triadic, believe it or not, I think a lot of the Triadic approach was formulated from the cadenzas of all the versions of I Want to Talk About You. You know, if you go back, it gets to the end of the tune, and I spent years driving back and forth between New York and Boston teaching with my CD player plugged into the cassette and hitting that, you know, when you could space and do a repeat. And I'd be like, man, what the hell is he playing? I'm just trying to understand that, you know. And then I realized he was playing triads that were covered with random chromatic approach. You know, when you figure this out and you can play it in half steps, which is really challenging, there's no departure of the chord, you know. Okay, so it's like Mary Had a Little Lamb. That's the way I look at it. But, you know, even at that tempo, Jay, that's really challenging. I blame myself for having that, you know, that much to think about, because I have a short attention span, and it still amazes me that this came from me, because in order to play this concept, you've got to be in there every second. If you drop out mentally, it's gone. You know, this thing, like when I looked at the four triads, major, minor, augmented, and diminished, I realized playing this way that a major triad was a minor triad inverted, and a minor triad is a major triad inverted, and the augmented comes from the major third, and the diminished comes from the minor third. Now, when you spin these up, when you're mixing pasta, right, they're all the same. Okay, now that's, again, technically they're not, even in the inversion, because I remember at NEC, the classical kids who took the course used to challenge me. Well, you know, if you invert that, it's really a minor sixth, and according to the, you know, I was like, dude, by the time, you know, you can figure out where that is in my playing, it'll be the end of the gig, you know, and so. I mean, I realized one day, you know, I came to this brilliant conclusion that Giant Steps was made up of an augmented triad, B, E flat, and G. So I said to myself, I sound like such a teacher, don't I? Jay, I said, man, if it's made up of an augmented triad, why can't you just play all augmented triad? They're going to kill me. But the kids are chomping at the bit in the class to hear how it goes, you know. I mean, I think that's one of the things I figured out in the Coltrane secrets, you know, of randomnivity, that, you know, you could be a little less formulated and still come up with something that made sense. You dig what I'm saying? And this is, I mean, you know, again, the chromatic approach, which I added a little bit, is what gives it a little more fluidicity, and you could almost, you know, be a little more resolving, just so people can hear that happens, versus playing, you know, which was Train's vision of here's how it goes, gang, you know. So, I mean, that's just one thing I got out of that. But there's a lot, like the modal, when you go to the minor and you drop minor against minor, you know, it suppresses the sound. And I found that when he was doing a lot of the prayer and meditation things, I was like, wow. It took me a long time to realize he was pressing minor triads against the fundamental. You know what I mean? And I couldn't figure out something that was right in front of my face, which were these minor triads being suppressed against each other. When you hear that, it didn't sound like minor triads to me. For me, maybe someone else heard that, but the way he had them disguised with that chromatic in between, man, it was such a haunting sound. And then one day I'm driving down on 95 going back to Beantown, and I realized, wait a minute, these are just random minor triads disguised by the chromatic approach.
I'd like to thank George Garzone for sharing his knowledge, experience, and humor with us in this video. If you'd like to learn more from George but can't afford Berklee tuition, I strongly recommend you purchase his books. They are a fantastic resource for all advanced musicians. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon in the next BetterSax video.